We good to start? Yay! Woo! How's everybody's PAX East going? Oh my God. Oh my God, I have the voice of God. Is this my voice is naturally loud, so I'm like always super conscious of am I being too loud, especially when there is a mic in front of me. Is this volume okay with everybody? Woo! It's not too loud. Nobody's going deaf. Cool. All right. How's everybody's PAX East going? Woo! Are y'all ready to talk about visual novels? Woo! So on that note, hello, welcome to Impossible Visual Novels from the last 5 years. The title, it's exactly what it says on the tin. There has never been a better time if English is the language you play visual novels in. There has never been a better time to be playing visual novels, to be into the genre, to want to get into the genre. It's awesome. And I feel like in the past 5 years, like, if it's not an annual occurrence, it's like every couple of months there's been like a huge landmark release for the visual novel genre in English. And it's like, when it happens a couple of times, it's like, that's neat. It means more people are playing visual novels, or at least that's what one presumes, right? We'll get into more of that later. But when it happens as much as it's been happening in the last 5 years, I'm like, I think that's worth digging into a little bit. I don't know. We'll look into it. So, before we get started, who am I and why do I get to talk about this? Hello, my name is Kennedy. Any pronouns are fine. I prefer they, them. And I'm quite a visual novel fan. Back when I was in high school, I had a terrible notebook computer, and this thing was on every technological life support you could imagine. I had an external keyboard, external mouse, external speakers, because everything on the computer itself was fried. I couldn't play games on there except the mighty visual novel, so I got really into them. For what it's worth, my favorites are The House in Fata Morgana. Anybody here played that? Woo! Okay, couple people. Umi Neko, and pretty much anything by Kotaro Uchikoshi. Woo! Yeah, okay, awesome. It sounds like there's a couple Kotaro Uchikoshi fans in here. Just out of curiosity, who all is sinking their teeth into 100 line right now? Woo! Couple people. Of the people who are playing 100 line, it's so long. Do you think, let's forget whether or not you actually are. Do you think you've even reached the halfway point? Yes, no, maybe so. Yeah, that's pretty much, yeah, no is the correct answer. Normally, I have business cards at the front because I'm also a freelance writer and a YouTuber. If my voice sounds kind of familiar and you're like, I swear I've heard that voice before, that is, you might be familiar with my YouTube content. I'm Red Bard. I made the video on the Yowie paddles. I'm that person. Oh, thank you. Thank you. But yeah, and I'm also a freelance writer, and for years, both as a freelance writer and as a YouTuber, I have covered visual novels a lot because I like them, and hopefully I can share some knowledge with all of you. The picture up there, by the way, it's The House in Fata Morgana. I swear I'm not going to shill it throughout this panel. It has not, unfortunately, it is not one of the relevant games I'll be talking about, but I always feel like I have to take my opportunity to say play The House in Fata Morgana every time I do a panel on visual novels, so there it is. So let's talk about what we are going to be exploring in this panel. I kind of already touched on this earlier. We've had a string of landmark visual novel releases in the past couple years. We've had things like the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. We've had Robotics Notes Dash. I think the most recent one we had at the top of my head is probably, well, I guess you could argue 100 line, but the Never 17 and Ever 7 bundle. And I know there was a lot of, yeah, I heard some clapping. Awesome. it's worth clapping for. Earlier we established there's more than a few Kotaro Uchikoshi fans in here. For those of you who don't know who he is, he's the guy who made the Zero Escape games and the Somnium Files. If there's one thing this guy will do, it is trap you in a room for 9 hours, and he will make you solve math and science puzzles to get out. And while you're doing this, you will literally be minding your own business, and then some character will say, "That reminds me of this niche scientific experiment from 1873, in which this very oddly specific thing happened." I don't know, I just thought it was worth mentioning. He loves that stuff, he's that guy. But yeah, Never 17 and Never 7, those were two very early games of his, and those nobody thought those were going to see the light of day in English, not in an official capacity, and yet here they are. You can play them right now. You shouldn't right now because you're hitting my panel, but when you leave, you can do that. So before we can get into the meat and potatoes, let's, real quick, some qualifiers. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about the kind of stuff we're going to be discussing. First and foremost, there are a lot of very awesome original English language visual novels out there, but this panel is entirely focused on Japanese visual novels. In particular, we're going to be looking at English language, like translations, official releases of Japanese visual novels. And I cannot emphasize, oh my God, that didn't blow anyone's ears out, did it? I banged the table and I heard the mic. I'm sorry, I'm so conscious of this, because I can't hear, but, I can't hear from where you guys are, you know what I mean. Anyway, I promise I won't ramble too much. Where was I? Yeah, we're talking about the official. I really want to emphasize the word official. Some of you may see some visual novels in here where you're like, well, that came out this year or that year, but I could have swore I played this in English sooner, or I could have swore I knew someone who played it in English sooner. There's literally hours upon hours of Let's Plays of people playing this game in English on YouTube, on Twitch, on wherever. And yes, a number of these games have received fan translations over the years. In many cases, and we will get into this a little more later on, but in many cases, that was the only way you could play this game if you couldn't read Japanese. So we are focusing strictly on the official releases. We will talk a little bit more about like fan translations and their place in all this more, but when I call a visual novel release impossible in the context of this panel, please know I mean as an official release. So that's what, yeah. We all good? We all good to go? Any questions before we get started? Nope, good to go? Cool. We can start now. All right, so let's start with some background information. I would love to do a panel on the history of visual novels, especially a history of visual novels coming out in English officially. I have 51 minutes, 20 seconds, 19, 18. I don't have time for that. I don't even kinda have time for that. So to keep things simple, I'm just gonna give you some bullet points, just some background information that I think is worth bearing in mind as we go through this panel and talking about what makes some of these releases so landmark and how they beat the odds. So while there's definitely been some really big hits over the years, visual novels historically in English have been a very niche genre. They are the only genre of game I can think of at the top of my head where there has been a lot of discourse over the years over whether or not it is even a genre of game. It is, just to make sure we're clear on that. But yeah, this is all to say that it's a genre that is very niche. It's a genre that a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about. It's a genre that, for better or for worse, people heavily associate with anime, and they have a vision in their head of what they think visual novels are. I think we're slowly moving past this, but there was a long period of time where pretty much anybody, I would talk to about visual novels outside of like the sphere of like anime and games would, think it's just dating sims. And there are a lot of dating sims, and dating sims are very fun, but there is much more to the genre than that. But then, if I had to pick a turning point for visual novels in the English language market, it would probably be like the early, mid-2010s. There were a couple of really big releases before that. The big one that stands out to me is obviously Ace Attorney on the Nintendo DS. It wasn't originally on the Nintendo DS. It was originally on the GBA in Japan. But over here, it was on the Nintendo DS, and it came out in 2005. But then, fast forward to the early and mid-2010s, we have a couple of things it's like a perfect storm, if you could call it a storm, I guess. We got the Steins Gate anime getting really popular, and that was and Steins Gate was something that nobody who was working on it, to the farthest of my knowledge, really expected to explode to the extent that it did. But if anybody was around at the time, you'll know Steins Gate got really huge, really fast. I don't know this for a fact, so take this with a grain of salt, but I feel like at the time there were people saying when the last episode aired, it caused a bump in Dr. Pepper sales. I don't know that for a fact, so take it with a grain of salt. Don't take that too seriously, but I think it's plausible. But yeah, so we have the Steins Gate anime doing really well, and the subsequent release of the visual novel in English in 2014. And in that same year, we also get Danganronpa, which is also very, very, very popular. Any Danganronpa fans in here? Woo! And then, of course, a couple years later, we got Doki Doki Literature Club. And that one also just really explodes into popularity. And I mean, I guess I can't go to every Doki Doki Literature Club fan and ask, is this the game that made you look more into visual novels? But again, take those with a grain of salt. But anecdotally, I feel like it sparked interest. I don't know to the extent that it was, like, how much of it was serious or how much of it was maintained, but all the same, it put visual novels in the spotlight. And of course, there's also other, like, I know I mentioned Steins Gate earlier, but then we also got, like, the Ufotable Fate anime. Fate Zero is the first Ufotable Fate anime, and that one is based on a light novel by Gen Urabuchi, who also writes visual novels. He wrote Song of Saya, and so it's a prequel to Fate Stay Night, which is a visual novel. So it's like, is Fate Zero a visual novel adaptation? Not in the strictest sense, but I guess it's not, right? But then we get Blade Works a couple years after that in 2014. We get the Heaven's Feel movies, which, if memory serves, a couple months ago recently became streamable for the first time. I think they're gorgeous. And that was the first time that, with Blade Works, there was a movie earlier that was more like a highlight reel for people who had already read the visual novel, but this was like a fully fledged adaptation. Heaven's Feel had never gotten adaptation. Fate Stay Night, for those of you who don't know, is one of the, I would argue, one of the biggest visual novels out there, period. So those releases were really big deals. And I don't know if this is me putting on a tinfoil hat or rose-tinted glasses, but another thing I consider a turning point for the visual novel in English is the Dies Irae Kickstarter. Now, I'm sure if you're at this panel, you're at PAX East, there's a pretty good chance you remember a period of time in the 2010s where kickstarting games was very in vogue. And crowdfunding, for some games, it is a very smart model. And quite a few visual novels got brought into English thanks to Kickstarters. And I don't know for a fact if the Dies Irae one is the one that collected the most money, but it collected 200 grand, which is not an insignificant amount of money. It's a lot of money. It's a lot more money than people on the outside looking in might expect for a release like DSE Ray, but if you are familiar with visual novels, so DSE Ray, it's not going to get talked about much in this panel just because it's a little farther off than the others, but this is one of the earlier, what I would consider impossible visual novel releases in English. It's very, very, very long. It's like not quite Umi Neko length, but it's pretty close. And Umi Neko, for those of you who don't know, is an exceptionally long visual novel. It's one of those visual novels that people love because it's awesome. And it's known for being very widely beloved among the people who've played it and also being very long. I have a video on my channel comparing it to the lengths of just like various books. It's redonkulous, and I love it. I love Umi Neko, but I digress. It's a very long visual novel, and it integrates stuff from other languages, but it got reviewed very well in Japan, so there were a lot of people who wanted to play it, but like no, when a game is as long as that is as a fan translator, you can't just do that project. It's going to take way too long, and if you want to do it in an official capacity, it's still so long that it's a huge undertaking, and ultimately it ended up getting kickstarted. That ended up being the way to go for that one, and it raised $200,000. And I think, because I remember it made some headlines at the time, and I choose, again, I don't know if this was as big of a turning point to everybody else as it is to me, but in my mind, I'm like, $200,000 for a visual novel that, like, visual novel fans know what that is because it reviewed well in Japan, and it was kind of legendary for being one of those, like, oh, this will never come out in English visual novels. Collecting $200,000, I don't know. I think that's notable, but maybe that's just me. So keeping all that background information in mind, that visual novels have historically been niche, but in the past like decade or so, slowly but slowly, we've been getting more recognition for visual novels, more attention on visual novels. What games are we talking about? What are what I would call the impossible visual novels? There's a couple others that you could argue belong on this list. Again, Ever 17 and Never 7 spring to mind. Air recently got released, and I think there's an argument to be made for that one as well. But I have 42 minutes and 45 seconds. So, sorry about that pause. So here's the ones we're going to be focusing on. Here are the releases that, for a long time, in visual novel fan circles, these were, for various reasons we'll get into, everybody was like, these are never going to officially come out in English. Visual novels are way too niche, and some of these have like specific circumstances where it's like, why would they license that over here, right? And then they came out here anyways, and that's awesome. So we got Robotics Notes and Robotics Notes Dash in 2020, Great Ace Attorney Chronicles in 2021, Chaos Head Noah in 2022, Witch on the Holy Night in 2023, Tsukihime, A Piece of Blue Glass Moon in 2024, Ace Attorney Investigations Collection in 2024, and Fate Stay Night Remastered again in 2024. So, Robotics Notes Dash, or more specifically, it was a pack. It was called like Robotics Notes Elite Dash, and it contained the first Robotics Notes and Robotics Notes Dash. Robotics Notes is the third main entry in the Psi-80V franchise, aka the semicolon franchise. If you're familiar with Steins Gate, it's that same franchise, and in fact, this is the one that follows up Steins Gate. Steins Gate fans might notice a familiar character on screen. Oh, yes, you can see it. Okay, good. Yeah, so it takes place. So Psi-80V, for those of you unfamiliar, is a franchise of sci-fi visual novels. The most popular entry in it is Steins Gate. It's by 5PB and Mages, and it's written by Chiyomaru Shikura. And yeah, Steins Gate is by far and away the most popular title in it, but Robotics Notes Dash, they're liked well enough. And it had an anime that came out in, I believe, 2012, yes. And it had an anime that came out in 2012, which was liked enough. I mean, it's hard because it had to follow up Steins Gate. And Steins Gate, again, really hit the scene and exploded. So with this one, as far as I've been able to tell, there wasn't like a specific reason, a specific thing that was keeping this out of the English language market. We'll talk about this a bit more as we go on. You'll notice it come up quite a bit, but it's very rare. In fact, it's nigh non-existent for Japanese license holders to go on the record or look directly into a camera and say, and this is the specific reason why the people in the English language market couldn't have my game until now. It's almost unheard of for that to happen. So unfortunately, I couldn't tell you specifically what happened here with robotics notes. It might be just because it was following up Steins Gate. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was because it just wasn't as popular. I don't know. We can only speculate. And unfortunately, that's going to be. You're going to hear that phrase a lot in this panel. We can only really speculate with it. But it did eventually. So the original robotics notes came out in 2012, and then Dash, the sequel, came out in 2019. We only got it in 2020, and it was a really big deal when it happened for Sci-ADV fans because it felt really out of the blue. So that's robotics notes. Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. Who here likes Ace Attorney? Woo! I do too. I think this pack is just lovely. So, Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. The originals came out in Japan in 2015 and 17, respectively. There's 2 of them. So the Ace Attorney franchise follows, it mostly follows Phoenix Wright. He's a lawyer. He always believes in the innocence of his clients. And it's you just like collecting evidence and presenting it in court. And they're very, very fun. And the Great Ace Attorney games are about Phoenix's ancestor who is studying abroad in England, and he meets one Sherlock Holmes. Let me tell you guys a fun fact about the estate of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, aka the creator of Sherlock Holmes. The estate, and I want to make sure this is clear, the estate of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is infamous for being very, very, very litigious. To use just another example, there is the anime Sherlock Hound that came out in the 70s. Hayao Miyazaki worked on it. It's a very lovely, delightful series, and that is... I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know the specifics, but that one is said to, from what I understand, legal issues with the estate of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle played a role in production delays with that anime, and it is hardly the only case of something like that. It's just my favorite example because I like anime, but... So, as far as I've been able to tell, Capcom, again, has never looked directly into a camera and said, and this is why you didn't get Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. But, like, it's kind of easy to guess, right? At the very least, it's very likely that this was at least a factor. Because when the game finally did come out in 2021, they came out as a pack. So Ace Attorney, for those of you who don't know, one of the things it is very famous for, it has just, the localizers are A+ pun masters. Just incredible. So the name, what I'm getting at is the names of characters. Characters are named very intentionally in Ace Attorney. That guy called Dead Man, he's called that because he's gonna die. No, I think he's Died Man. That's a real thing that happened in one of them. Died Man, and he was a man who died. I know that's hard to believe. So it didn't escape notice in this series, which is known for its brilliant names, when one Sherlock Holmes was named Herlock Sholmes, And interestingly, Great Ace Attorney Chronicles is not the first fictional property to have done that. Who here is familiar with Arsène Lupin? Yeah, awesome. And so for those of you who don't know, Arsène Lupin is a character originally from literature. He's a French thief, and he's very cool. He's very suave. And his creator, Maurice Leblanc, in 1906 wanted to make a short story in which Lupin meets Sherlock Holmes. And the litigious estate of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was like, no, absolutely not. So Maurice Leblanc, who, God help him, he wanted his fanfic, renamed him Herlock Sholmes. And that's how Arsène Lupin met legally distinct Sherlock Holmes. But yeah, so that's presumably why this game didn't come out sooner. Again, it's never been hard verified anywhere, but I don't know. I've always thought it sounded like, if it's not the whole reason, and it's probably not the whole reason, it at least definitely feels like something they took very seriously into consideration. Because I would assume the estate of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle probably has more than enough money to take anyone to court. Chaos Head Noah. Okay, so the original Chaos Head came out in 2008, and then Chaos Head Noah came out a year later, and it was the full version of it. It was the canon version. This is the first Chaos Head / Chaos Head Noah is the first entry in that Sci-ADV series I mentioned earlier. Does it have an anime, some of you may be thinking? No, of course not. Shoosh, we don't talk about that one. Everybody's like, the Tsukihime anime doesn't exist. And I'm like, y'all, Chaos Head's the one that doesn't exist. Anyway, so Chaos Head. It's from the same Sci-ADV series. Chaos Head Noah is kind of regarded as the perfected version of it. And for no clear reason at all, we didn't get it until 2022. And when we did get it, the official translation was not good. It was very robotic. It was very stilted. And a legacy term is, in translation, it's a specific way of translating, or in some cases not translating, a phrase that's been very baked into the fandom, usually through big fan subs or official releases. Just it's a way to referring something. It's a way of translating, or again, in some cases, not translating something that the fandom just it kind of adopts, right? So when Nakama, yeah, well, kind of. That's a loan word, but and a loan word is just a word in Japanese that's just left there. But I digress. Sci-ADV has a lot of concepts that carry over from game to game, so there's a lot of loan words. Sci-ADV was something that got very fan-translated before the official releases really took off. So there were, with Chaos Head, obviously because Chaos Head Noah didn't come out until 2022, it was Chaos Head Vanilla, I believe, had been fan-translated long before this. There might have been one available for Noah. I don't remember. But the point is, there were a lot of legacy terms that were very not used for no clear reason. I remember that there were one of the translators from Steins Gate. He really should have been the one. Really should have been the one to translate this. I remember he was one of the ones talking about a bunch of the legacy terms, and he was far from the only one. There were a lot of known Steins Gate fans in the community, a lot of known Sci-ADV fans talking about it. What I'm getting at is you can go back and you can find posts of people comparing the official translation to the not loan words, the legacy terms to other ones, and it's not even just that. It's so stilted. You know how when you go into Google Translate and it sounds really robotic? I don't know. Translating is an art and not a science, and I will die on this hill, but that's beside the point. The point is the official translation was deeply unpopular, so a lot of people didn't like the release on release. And also, it was rejected from Steam ever so briefly. Nobody's really sure why. It's widely believed that someone at Steam just saw like visual novel with a bunch of cute pink hair anime girls in high school uniforms, and oh, it's very gory. Oh, we can't have none of this going on. For whatever reason, it got rejected from Steam, and that caused a bit of a firestorm for a few days. And it's on Steam now. It ultimately, worked out. But this is all to say that when it came out, and it came out in a pack with Chaos Child, which is another game in the CyTV series, its release was not terribly strong, and a lot of people prefer playing this one with the fan translation. I'm not going to comment on which one is better, but don't read into that. But the length of time that had passed between Chaos Head Noah coming out in Japan and Chaos Head Noah coming out here, more than Robotics Notes, that's why people were like, this one's never going to come out here. We got, Steins Gate came and went, and it's 2025. Nothing's happening with Chaos Head and Chaos Child anymore. But no, we got it very out of the blue, following up Robotics Notes. One presumes that maybe Robotics Notes sold well enough for them to release this. Maybe, I don't know. Again, they've never looked in the camera and said, this is why you all got it. But the length of time in this one is why people thought it was so impossible. Unfortunately, its release got very damaged, but it is what it is. Witch on the Holy Night 2023. Who here is familiar with Type Moon by name? Couple people, awesome. Who here is familiar with Fate Stay Night, Fate Grand Order, just Fate in general? Yep, Type Moon is that company. So, a brief background on Type Moon. So Type Moon, like I said, they are the duo that made Fate Stay Night. They made Tsukihime, both of which we will be talking about later. They made a bunch of other stuff too, Witch on the Holy Night, for example. And I so wish I could tell you why none of their games came out in English, in spite of the success of all the Fate anime, in spite of the success of Fate Grand Order, in spite of the success of every sign pointing to, hey, in a landscape for a genre that doesn't usually financially do super well in English, your game is one of the few cases where all signs point to it doing great. I wish I could tell you why they were so allergic to free money. It baffles me. It baffles every Type Moon fan. Everybody has their own theories about whether it was something on Type Moon's side, or if it was just they were asking too much money and nobody could or wanted to pay. I wish I could tell you. I am so curious myself. If any of you find out, please tell me. But for whatever reason, Type Moon has been making visual novels since about the turn of the millennium. And it took until 2023, again, after the Fate anime, after Fate Grand Order, after Melty Blood, for us to get any of them. And of all the titles to come out first, it was Witch on the Holy Night, which is good, but it's certainly not what Type Moon is known for. All the same, what made this release feel impossible at the time was the fact that it was Type Moon. And for reasons, again, people to this day can only speculate, Type Moon stuff just... The visual novels specifically. Type Moon stuff was coming out in English. Melty Blood, Fate Grand Order, the Fate anime. There were Type Moon stuff it was coming out here. You can go to any anime con, go to Anime Boston. You can't take 2 steps without running into some Fate merch. You can't do it. But 2023, they announced that Witch on the Holy Night would be coming to English. This game originally came out in 2012, but the one that we got over here was the remaster that came out in Japan in 2022. It is a very good visual novel. Again, it's Type Moon. If you like Fate Stay Night, if you like Tsukihime, you'll probably like this. It has an anime on the way, so that's neat. But yeah, no, it's very hard to overstate how big a deal this announcement was for this visual novel that, again, what really gets me about this one is like this isn't even the thing Type Moon is known for. But people were popping off so hard because this was the first time we had gotten any of their visual novels officially available in English. Up until now, it was pretty much just fan translations. I know at the time of the announcement, a fan translation for Witch on the Holy Night, which is often called Mihoyo, just as a shortening of its Japanese name, was a work in progress. Fate Stay Night, we'll talk about that in Tsukihime later, but those, you could only play them in English through fan translations, of which there were pretty notable ones that were already out for years by that point. So yeah, this is to say it was a big deal. You would think with the zest at which Type Moon fans were posting about this, you would think they had just discovered the cure for cancer. It was a very fun day to be looking around the Type Moon fan communities. Speaking of Type Moon, Tsukihime, A Piece of Blue Glass Moon. Who here has played Melty Blood? Anybody? A couple people? Awesome. And have any of y'all played Tsukihime? It's okay if you haven't. A few of you have. That's awesome. So, Melty Blood is a very, very fun fighting game. You may know it as that game Neko Arc is from. Neko Arc being that tiny, annoying cat girl. Yeah. And this is the game she is sourced from, Tsukihime. It's the game Melty Blood is based on. So more specifically, Tsukihime, the original Tsukihime came out in the early 2000s. I'm drawing a blank. I want to say 2001 or 2000. I thought I had it on this slide, and I didn't, and now I feel like a buffoon. And then the remake came out in Japan in 2021. Y'all, Melty Blood, it's no Street Fighter. It's no Tekken. It's been on the EVO main stage, and that's cool. But it's what we in the FGC call a poverty fighter. There are people who love it. It has a community. But it's never, it's not Street Fighter, it's not Tekken, it does not attract those same crowds. But I love Melty Blood. But Melty Blood becomes a cult hit. There is one of my favorite pieces of like video game related event promotion of all time is from CEO, which is a big fighting game tournament in, I believe this was 2017, maybe 16. Melty Blood players, again, has a very cult player base, and they have developed a reputation for playing anywhere at any time. And CEO took advantage of this. At least I'm pretty sure it was CEO. Yeah, it was CEO. And they promoted the fact that it had like its own, I think it was its own stage or its own area. I'm drawing a blank. But they promoted it with this video where the Melty Blood players are literally playing outside in a Popeyes parking lot. And then the TO comes out and he's like, y'all know you got a section inside, right? And they're like, oh, sick. This is all to say, yeah, Melty Blood has a very dedicated cult fan base, very widely beloved. Only 2 of them have officially come out in English. But still, the point is that that very dedicated player base. And Tsukihime, the visual novel it's based on, the original visual novel never came out in English. To this day, never has come out in English. And unfortunately, I'd be willing to bet I don't think it will anytime soon. I'd love to be wrong. Please, Aniplex, if you're watching this, prove me wrong. But the remake, so in 2021, it got a remake, which is awesome, by the way. And we didn't get it until 2023. When the announcement came that it was happening and there was no immediate thing that it was coming out in English, and then it came out and there was still no announcement and there wasn't an announcement for a while, people lost hope and they were like, Witch on the Holy Night was a fluke. Or more specifically, this was also before Witch on the Holy Night, and Witch on the Holy Night is what gave a lot of people hope that we might actually get the Tsukihime remake. And we did. And it was a huge plot twist because Tsukihime has, like, Melty Blood has that cult fan base, but Tsukihime also has it to a certain extent. The original visual novel has a fan translation that's been circulating for several years. I don't even know how long at this point. And a lot of people have played it that way because it's the only way. If you can't read Japanese and you can read English, it's the only way to play it. It's simply, it's a matter of, like, at some point, it does become a matter of accessibility. Like, I would love to give someone money for this, but, you know, when they're not providing any avenues, what else are you supposed to do? But the remake is now available, and again, it was one of those things that when the announcement came, you would think Type Moon fans had found a cure for cancer the way they were reacting. Witch on the Holy Night gave a lot of people hope, but even so, because the original announcement kind of came and went without anything about an English release, a lot of people just kind of lost hope, and they were like, okay, it's just Type Moon being Type Moon. We're not getting this game. But then we did. It is, I would say, the second most well-known Type Moon work. We will get to the first after this. Ace Attorney Investigations Collection. So yeah, woo! So this one only half counts. So the Ace Attorney Investigations Collection is another collection of 2 games, Ace Attorney Investigations 1 and 2. And 1 did come out in English. It came out in 2010, and the second came out in Japan in 2011, and we never got it in English until last year. This is one of those very rare cases where we do know someone from Capcom did, in a manner of speaking, look into the camera and say, and this is why you never got it. In 2013, then Capcom Senior VP Christian Svensson said about the matter, as it is, all dev and localization focus has been on Dual Destinies, and the last data point we have to work from was Ace Attorney Investigations, which, as I've shared in the past, was poor at best. It did not sell well, and that is why we didn't get 2 until now. It is worth mentioning that 2, I think, your mileage may vary. Anecdotally, everybody I know who has played them both prefers the second over the first. Like, it's so, I don't know. I think that makes this whole case very interesting because it's like, the sales of the first one weren't good. There's a lot of people who prefer the second one, so I don't know, maybe that'll do. I don't know. I thought it was interesting and weird, but we didn't get it until last year, and as you have seen there, it originally came out in Japan in 2011. Between this and the Great Ace Attorney stuff, it was a very weird period for Ace Attorney where we just weren't getting them in English. It was very disheartening as an Ace Attorney fan at the time, and I was an Ace Attorney fan at the time. I remember back when this game was like still in development and people were like theorizing about it. People thought in English it was going to be called Perfect Prosecutor. I remember there's one character who's an athlete, and people were like theorizing about potential pun names characters could have based on their illustrations. And this guy's like obviously an athlete, so they were like, maybe his name will be Dennis Racket. But no, they gave him what I would argue is the best name in all of Ace Attorney. They gave this athlete the bespoke name of Jacques Portsman. They called him Jock Sportsman. It's visionary, honestly. I wish I could be half that creative. Fate Stay Night Remastered. I would argue that in terms of sheer name brand recognition, There are very few visual novels that can hold a candle to Fate Stay Night thanks to the marketing and multimedia empire it has developed. Of course, Fate Grand Order is an economy unto itself. Fate merchandising, an economy unto itself. It's staggering. And yet, in spite of the rampant financial success Fate has had, even in the English language market over the years, this game originally came out in Japan in 2004, and then Rialta Nua, which is an updated version of it. There's a few differences. It had more CGs, it had voice acting, and there were no H scenes. Came out in 2007, and this is just a remaster of the Rialta Nua version. The point is, Fate Stay Night had been around by the time the remaster came out. Fate Grand Order had been around. The Fate anime had been around. Even Dean Stay Night, which is the other Fate anime that we don't talk about. But why did we wait so long? I wish I had an answer for you. I so wish I had an answer for you. It baffles Type Moon fans to this day why Type Moon was saying no to free money. Or if they were even saying no to free money. Again, some people theorize that maybe they were just asking for way too much money, more money than anybody could afford, because visual novels are historically very niche, and not one presumes that there's not a long list of potential publishers, of potential licensors who could afford, something what they were asking. Again, this is all just theoretical, though. Nobody knows for sure. What we do know is that, oh my God, it didn't come out for so long, and literally everybody was so confused. You could only play it in English with a fan translation. And again, it's one of those, at some point, it becomes an issue of accessibility. How else are you supposed to play it? And it's wacky that it took this long. Its launch, while not as disastrous as Chaos Head Noah's, wasn't awesome. There were a lot of technical issues with it, where the wrong sprites would come up at the wrong spots unless you set your computer's locale to Japanese. There were a lot of people posting on social media, they'd be at the start of the game, and there'd be end game characters in the school, and it was disastrous. But it was fixed within a matter of hours. It's no longer like that. But it is finally officially available in English. Again, this is, I would argue, one of the most iconic visual novels in the entire genre, and absolutely worth a read for anybody interested in getting into the genre. It's also, interestingly, the only one of the Type Moon visual novels that have finally come out in English that never got a physical release. As though Type Moon is saying, fine, you get Fate Stay Night, but we're not giving you a physical edition. Just one last little bit of spite. But yeah, no, it didn't come out for a long time. Nobody really knows why. So when this announcement came out, it was huge news. It was a very quick turnaround between the time of the announcement and the time of the release. But all the same, it's widely considered to be an awesome port. I got to review this game when it came out. I got a review copy, and I think it's an excellent port. So that's awesome and all, what we've all just discussed, but this still leaves, the question of what changed between 2005 with the release of Ace Attorney and recent years, especially 2024, which many of you may have noticed had more of these releases that people were this is never going to come out in English. What changed? Well, there's a lot of things that changed. Maybe you've heard of this niche thing. Oh my God, what was it called? The COVID-19 pandemic? Maybe you remember that? I know it was so long ago, but and it was so forgettable, but more people got into video games, more people got into anime, and that in turn causes visual novel fan communities to grow, coverage for those fan communities to grow. Digital distribution was also becoming a much more common thing, and if you, say, can't afford to do physical distribution, digital only might provide you a really good alternative. We mentioned earlier that crowdfunding can be really good for some releases. A a bunch of these games had like new ports that were coming out in Japan, which one presumes probably caused a good segue for these conversations to start about maybe bringing them into English. These are only some of the elements at play, but there's something else going on here. Licensing. When it comes down to English language releases of anime, games, manga, whatever, everything boils down to licensing, and the number one motivator for licensing is money. So one presumes that's, something that probably played a huge role in a lot of these. For Robotics Notes and Chaos Head, for example. Chaos Child's a different game in the series. Another Sci-ADV game, which was very infamously in development hell for a very long time, called Anonymous Code, was in development when those games came over here. Again, they've never looked in the camera and confirmed this, but it's very easy to presume that that's how they funded Anonymous Code, which was taking way longer than even the people who were working on it expected. To give you some perspective, originally, it was believed that Anonymous Code would come out in 2016. It didn't come out until 2023. So, again, not hard verified, but one presumes the licensing of Robotics Notes and Chaos Child, or I keep saying Chaos Child, Chaos Head, probably had a lot to do with them needing money to make Anonymous Code. But money isn't everything. Type Moon, like we've talked about, they don't need money. They have money. They have Fate Grand Order. If Kinoko Nasu, the writer in Type Moon, wanted to, he could probably announce tomorrow that he's just done doing stuff and probably live a comfortable life. So it does beg the question, like I was saying earlier, it does beg the question why Type Moon is so exceptional in this case. And I truly wish I had an answer for you. If you find one, please let me know. It's very easy to make assumptions. And there are theories. A lot of people, the most popular theories, and I can't emphasize enough that these are theories, tend to be, again, either A, Type Moon was asking more money than what anybody could or was willing to do, or that for whatever reason they just didn't want to release it here, probably something to do with not having confidence in any licensors or just really underestimating the size of the market. I don't know. I always thought them underestimating the size of the market wasn't really a good theory, because it's like Fate Grand Order is out here and makes money hand over fist. Like, especially at its peak. The Fate anime, the Ufotable Fate anime did well. Do you know how much a Blu-ray of Fate Zero cost when it came out? And people still bought it. So it could be an issue of confidence in license holders. Again, it's so weird with Type Moon. They're such a weird and exceptional case. I wish I could go up to them and just be like, hey, why do you hate the English language market? Or why did you hate it until Witch on the Holy Night? I wish I knew what to tell you. But my point here is licensing. There has undeniably been a lot of growing interest in visual novels, which one presumes and hopes translates to more money circulating among people who want to publish and license visual novels, which then translates to, more being on the table when you talk about licensing, and maybe the license holders having more confidence, more stock in bringing it over. I don't know. It's different games have different circumstances, but more people, it's like I was saying at the beginning of the panel, it's been a slow process, but more people have been getting into visual novels lately, and one presumes it translates to more money being here, and at the end of the day, capitalism sucks, but money is what makes the world go round. So real quick, before we close off, I want to have a moment of appreciation for some other impossible visual novel releases that were just impossible in general, not just in English, but period, just because it felt like it was worth mentioning them. 100-line Last Defense Academy. I mentioned this at the beginning of the panel. It is a collaborative effort by Kazutaka Kodaka, the creator of Danganronpa, and Kotaro Uchikoshi, the creator of Zero Escape and Ida Somnium Files, with 100 fleshed out endings. This game is a monster. When the reviews dropped for it, as far as I was able to see, only one reviewer actually finished it in time for embargo, and they said it took them 133 hours. And Kazutaka Kodaka, yeah, so this game is very ambitious, and it's also, frankly, very excellent. All the reviews across the board, from what I've been able to see, mine, I know at least, was reviews were excellent. Mine was excellent. I love this game. I think it's awesome. But Kazutaka Kodaka, in spite of, from what I've seen, it's one of those games where it's like everybody who's played it has loved it. It's just not enough people have played it. And Kazutaka Kodaka has been on Blue Sky being very blunt about the fact that this game was very ambitious, for better or for worse, and that financially they need it to succeed very much, or they risk not existing. We're still on the verge of going under, is something he said as recently as May 2nd. And then there's Anonymous Code. This is the one I mentioned earlier. It is the latest entry in PSI-ADV, and it was in development for several years, almost a decade. It was announced in 2015, and originally they were like, yeah, it's going to be out in 2016. Anyway, it didn't come out until 2023. And these are both visual novels that it's nothing short of miraculous that they came out at all, let alone that we got them in English as quick as we did. So I don't know, I thought that was worth mentioning. So what does this mean for visual novels as a whole? I said it at the beginning, and it bears repeating before we're out of here. It has never been a better time to get into visual novels. There has never been a better time to want to dip your toes into the genre, to want to play some of its biggest hits, even if you can't read Japanese. It's just, let me rewind, I'm sorry. Like I said at the beginning, we are slowly but surely getting to a point where there's a much better understanding. We're finally evolving, like the mainstream, or mainstream, like in terms of like people who play video games, like idea of what a visual novel is. Slowly but surely, I do see fewer and fewer people clinging to the "it's all just joke dating sims," right? Thing. And more and more people are realizing that there is more to the genre than that. There's a lot of, like, I would say, especially if you're a fan of horror games, I think visual novels are going to be, like, right up your alley, probably. There's so many good horror visual novels, and the genre really lends itself for immersing you into that horror in a very unique way that many other genres struggle to do. I mean, they do it in other ways, but in the way that visual novels do, you don't see that very much. And more people, I think, are getting cognizant of that. And one hopes that this will make visual novels just a bigger genre in general. Maybe we won't be like talking about impossible, like, maybe we won't have it like an annual thing where it's like, oh, this big landmark release that nobody thought was going to happen for 20 years is happening. Maybe we'll get to a point where like those have all happened, and most visual novels like are coming out in English in general, including some of the more niche ones. All the ones I just mentioned in this panel are all pretty big in terms of visual novels, but like, your more niche ones, they're not going to get the same buzz that your Fate Stay Nights are. But it would be cool if they did get more buzz and more coverage and more attention, and more people played them in general, and people understood the genre better, and yeah, that'd be really cool. One similarly hopes that this will translate to more indie visual novels being made, more original English language visual novels. They haven't really been relevant to this panel, but like to throw some recommendations. Like, we're at PAX East. I've played some awesome visual novels at PAX East. I played the demo of Monster Prom a couple of years ago, back when that was back when that was new. What was it? Last year or the year before? Year before, I think. I played the demo for Slay the Princess. Woo! And I played it right here at PAX East. That game is awesome. And one hopes, I think that would be awesome if we could get more indies and more original English language visual novels, because there's just a big enough audience to support that. We have 15 seconds left. We don't have time for discussion, but thank you all for coming out here on a Thursday to talk about visual novels with me. If you have any questions, you can come up here at the front. Thank you all. I hope you have a great PAX.